This is the Yellow Kit. It has great significance in the history of comics. It is created by American cartoonist Richard F. Outcault and first published in 1895. According to most of the people, it is known as the first comic character ever created. However, the real history of comics actually goes back much earlier, to the first humans. This documentary is based on the question, what are comics' contributions to the society and art? This video covers history of comics, the connection between comics and art, and lastly, comics benefits for an individual and the society. Now, let's start. The first examples of the art of telling something by drawing are the animal symbols known to date from 25,000 BC in France. This demonstrates how this practice was very old in history. However, the actual history of comics begins in the 1900s. As I mentioned before, the first comic character ever created was Richard Fulton Outcault's The Yellow Kid. It was not a real comic book, honestly. It was a comic strip, where the journey begins and ends in one scene, mostly consisting of only one page. These strips differed from a picture book, because instead of under the pictures, the scripts took place within the picture. Additionally, Outcault was known as the father of the speech balloons. Outcault's and his followers' aim was to help people who can't read or don't like reading. This was the purpose of comics in the USA. These stories were mostly humorous, short, and comic stories. Then Americans named this as comics. These strips started taking place with the newspapers and got popular. It helped illiterate people to get informed and have fun. In the first 1930s, as you can guess, the biggest comic publishing company was DC Comics. First comic character who got popular was DC Superman. In 1938, Superman exactly came out where a hero was necessary in the USA. Superman, who came from another world and wore underpants over his suit, became a symbol of popular culture. In addition, Superman comics, which were adapted from books to movies, television, and serials, played a major role in influencing other branches of art. In the same period, illustrators such as Will Eisner, Alex Raymond, and Hal Foster achieved huge sales with their writings. With World War II, the superhero genre has lost its relevance. Towards the end of World War II, sloppy, one-read comics called pulp became common. In these comics, topics that appeal to adults such as crime, sexuality, and horror were handled. Following World War II, the pulp comics of the 1950s were filled with topics such as anarchism and human rights. While the comic industry already had enough problems, another dark cloud came over it, Dr. Frederick Wertham. He put forward an unlimited number of groundless theories, saying that Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman are bad examples for children. He wrote in his articles that comics negatively affect the physical, mental, and moral development of children and young people. All these accusations had a bad effect on comics and almost destroyed them. The most important of the precautions taken was the Comics Code Authority. It was a document from the censorship board that approves comics before publication. By this movement, comics have been stripped of violence, sexuality, and dark characters like werewolves and vampires. A lot of comic book companies said goodbye to the market. Thus, the golden age of the comics industry, which began in the 1930s and lasted until the end of the 1950s, came to an end. During this time, Timely Comics, one of DC's major rivals, changed its name to Marvel Comics and formed its own superhero team in response to DC's favorite Justice League, Fantastic Four. It was almost revolutionary in its time. They were heroes who speak the language of the street and constantly argue. Stan Lee caused another revolution by creating Spider-Man. Unlike the flawless characters like Superman, Spider-Man had problems in life similar to people. In the 1970s, DC Comics created a more fantasy-like world with fancy and flawless characters, while Marvel was more realistic and more reflection of society, where characters deal with their own problems, other than their duty as a superhero. Then Marvel made its biggest move. It made the Comic Code Authority document a thing of the past. Stan Lee published an issue without taking the authorization. It did not reduce sales, but made it one of the most popular issues, and a more brave era began in the comics era. In the later years of the Brave Age, Marvel furthered the realism. DC produced excellent stories. Then masterpieces like Sandman and Watchmen came. They mixed DC's flawless superhero concept with Marvel's sense of realism. Comics have become more serious, high quality, and expensive. During these periods, other alternative comic interpretations from different cultures, such as Japanese manga, have also gained popularity. Comics began to be used not only for entertaining people, but also for education, teaching, and telling history. Despite all these innovations, the last years of the 20th century were not very bright. Comics started to be seen as an investment tool. In fact, comic book collectors were starting to outnumber comic book readers, so demand increased and the rarity factor disappeared. As a result, they were again in crisis. In fact, in 1996, Marvel had to declare bankruptcy. Today, comics still exist. Perhaps the biggest contribution of the comic book industry was again to the cinema and film industry. Although the comics have lost their popularity and the movie industry using sound and motion design has taken the lead, it is still the movie industry that is why most comic book characters are still recognized and loved. In this respect, it can be concluded that comics owes a lot to cinema and cinema to comics. Comics consist of two components, text and images. The images lead the reader into having an opinion about setting and characters, while on the other hand text builds the content. For this process to work, these components must be designed precisely and harmoniously. The text should be relevant to the content as well as the images must be in a flow. This at first indicates the effort must be spent on the comics. Some people say that comics never evoke the imagination since every scene is given. However, this is wrong. If art's definition is a physical creation of something which requests much effort as well as a way to express the creator's minds, and one of the art's function is to promote creativity, comics very well suit this definition. A comic artist spends a lot of time on the work in creating the content and reflecting the particular stuff on the paper using images and texts. In addition, comic artists use their imagination and creativity in order to create the best deliverable content in a way that someone would never be able to do without any effort. Otherwise, everyone could draw and write something. While every fictional content pushes the reader into imagination, comics are already one of the strongest examples of this movement. The reader tries to put those images and texts and then watches the scene, just like a movie. In their minds, they set up sound and effects for the characters, thinking about their life outside the book, their past and many other factors. Also, the reader fills up the gaps in the flow of the pictures. So, comics push the audience to use their imagination while reading. Comic is a language and its entire vocabulary is those visual symbols, which contain the power of both cartoon and reality. The heart of the comic lies in the spaces between the panels, and the images in the reader's mind fill the gap, says Scott McCloud. In these lines, the creativity evoked in the reader's mind is highlighted. Scott McCloud states that the heart is the spaces between the panels, and it's the reader's duty to fill up these parts. So in other words, he implies that readers are the ones that declare a purpose and state a meaning towards comic books, by using imagination and creativity. There are a lot of comics with different styles, and each of these comics is written to serve the reader. This service can be anything from entertaining to teaching, to imaginative to passing time, because what the art of comics actually provides is limitless. What the comic art offers is limitless. I can say that there is no limit to the comic book because even the novels consisting of only text are used for unlimited purposes, while the comic book is a similar version supported with pictures. Some illustrators like Art Spiegelman use comics to tell history, while others like Eiichiro Oda use this art to transfer the storyline in their heads, and creators such as Jonathan Fetterworm make a documentary-like expression through comics. So, coming to the main point, let's remember our question. Why should comics be considered as art? To answer this question, first of all we have to open up the term art. Some define art as a representation of the feelings and emotions of the artist using a physical tool, while others like philosopher Immanuel Kant state that something can be art only if it's aesthetic, original and needs a lot of effort. As I already talked about this before, comics need a lot of effort to be created. For example, a comic artist works a lot without any holiday just to finish one page per day. So it takes approximately 6 to 7 months to create a 200-page comic book, which is a lot of time. And it's only the drawing part. There is still writing script, deciding on a content and publishing. In addition, the pictures and text that make up the comics are considered art separately. So comics that combine the two with creativity should also be considered as art. One reason for people to not accept comics as art is the misconceptions. One misconception is that comics only handle superheroic topics that are suitable for only children to read. However, it is wrong. First of all, the idea of comics only covering superheroes is probably because most popular comics are all about superheroes. However, there are some comics such as Alan Moore's Watchmen that covers more adult topics. Furthermore, Maus is the history of a Jewish family living in Nazi Germany. Also, 50s pulp comics were all for adults. So it can be concluded that comics can cover all types of themes for all ages. People just have to make a little research for the comic genre best for them. Some people believe that comics don't have any literary value. Comics can influence a reader and inspire emotions as strong as any novels and poetry. Comics could be both serious and humorous as precisely as a novel can be. For further example, Art Spiegelman's Maus has become the first comic who won the Literary Award Pulitzer in 1992. University of Oregon and many other universities have a course known as Comic Studies. Additionally, according to Time magazines, comics are literary devices since they included Watchmen in the list of greatest novels of all time. In summary, comics is an art form just like any other branches of art. Although modern comics are not as old as others, it is still evident that comics are as full and aesthetically artistic as them. There are many comic artists who give their life to this and created this beautiful art. The fact of comics being a branch of art is undeniable. Comics can add a lot to a human and society in general. First of all, it is a wonderful starter if someone can't gain the habit of reading. If you ask people between the ages of 30 to 60, more than 80% of them would cite comics as how they loved reading. Comics consist of less writing compared to novels and also contain images, so it is easier to read as well as it appears to be less boring. Of course, it would be wrong to put all of the comics into these categories, but it is still evident that some comics could act as a helper to draw people into reading. It also offers a good starter for someone learning a new language. So what parents have to do is not to punish their children for reading comics and then get angry with them for not reading books, but to encourage them to read, sure at a reasonable level. Furthermore, as I mentioned a lot before, it can contribute to someone's imagination and creativity since a lot of different types of topics with different styles are expressed within comics. It can move someone to think differently and productively. Comics could also be used in teaching and instructing. Just like how Richard Outcault and Americans invented comics to educate illiterate people, comics can show something very simple. For example, instructions of a procedure may be given through comics, which are more attractive and understandable and drag people to read and follow the needed instructions. By this way, more people would follow the rules. In addition, comics could be used to give global messages in an effective way. There are many examples of this throughout the history. Pulp comics were always giving messages about taking action against the government. In 1941, in the first issue of Captain America punches Adolf Hitler. Even though nowadays comics are not used as intensively as they used to be, still comics are a great tool to do this since they draw a lot of attention in public. Comics could be a productive and quality free time activity. Comics can be read for hours without getting bored and provide entertaining and valuable time. In this respect, it is as adequate as books, perhaps even more because it is faster and more comfortable to read. And as there are a variety of comics, everyone could find something interesting for them. In summary, comics are art that has a great contribution to the world we live in and the lives of people in this world, although it is ignored, not taken seriously and ridiculed by many. Even though the comic art had a difficult life with many ups and downs from the beginning of the 20th century to the 21st century, it has always progressed by improving and evolving. Comics are unique on their own. They are special in many aspects. Comic art is a totally alternate world, which possesses the ability of telling a lot with little text and simple illustrations. Mark what Scott McCloud says, amplification through simplification. Maybe, in the end, Scott McCloud gave the most accurate and meticulous definition of comics, which is an art form with no doubt.